Good afternoon. How's everyone doing post-lunch? Okay. All right. So if Michelle Geathers says that she expects something from me, that means I have to deliver and rip up my entire agenda. I'm sorry, Eugene. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that. Well, we are going to have some fun in the next 30 minutes, and it's going to be participatory. And so I do apologize. So post-lunch, we got to bring some energy. The inner camp counselor in me is going to bring out some activities. We're going to do some stretches. No, I'm kidding. You guys, we can laugh. It is Monday. It's nice and warm. It's freezing cold in Columbus, Ohio, I think. And so we've got a really, really fun conversation. I am going to give you a preview, though. So I am going to ask our three panelists to introduce themselves. They're going to talk to you about the lens in which they think about courage. And we think about courage showing up in the workplace. So we heard this morning that it's about leading the way, it's about modeling the way. We're going to practice that in this session. So the first scenario, I am going to ask them. The second scenario is going to come from the audience. And then you all are going to break out into groups of 3 or 4 for a few minutes. You're going to think about some of the scenarios. And then we're going to just do a little popcorn back and forth. Does that sound good? Great? Okay. All right. Why don't you start, my friend, and tell me the lens in which, in 60 seconds or less, the lens in which you view courage and human performance.
So my neuroscience lab has done the fundamental research, identifying how humans connect, work together, perform at their best. And because Michelle made me do it, we created an app that identifies whether people are flourishing or not neurologically. And the short takeaway from that is we flourish when we're embedded in community. So community is extraordinarily important for social creatures like humans.
Suraj, give us his name.
Yes, Paul, Zach.
I have no name tag. Paul Zach, I'm at Claremont Graduate University and the founder of Immersion Neuroscience. Thanks, Eugene.
Angus.
My name is Angus Fletcher. I'm a professor at The Ohio State University. I'm known for thinking that a big part of what makes humans smart is our ability to think in stories. So I don't think of story as something that you just use to communicate. I think of it as something that you use to imagine, to dream, and to dare. My ultimate background is in a neurophysiology lab in neuroscience, but I went off and I studied Shakespeare at Yale, and I've sort of spent the rest of my career kind of wandering around working with folks like Pixar and U.S. Army Special Operations, and crucially, third graders. And the thing that I believe fundamentally about courage is that it's contagious, and I'm interested in figuring out ways to spread the contagion.
That is the only contagion that I would like us to talk about spreading in 2026,
Sorry.
Angus.
Coughing on you.
Yeah. Brian?
My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the founder of Heroic, and I've spent half of the last 25 years building and selling a couple of social platforms, the other half immersed in ancient wisdom, modern science, and practical tools to help people show up as their best. So the ancient ideal of flourishing was called eudaimonia. Aristotle would have said that's the summum bonum, the greatest good of life, the ultimate game. And I think that courage is the expression of us living in integrity with our highest values and expressing wisdom, discipline, love, and ultimately courage. And excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. So these are the lenses that they're going to look at these issues that we discuss. And so the first rapid fire scenario I would like to throw at you is, I imagine something that you all have experienced, is trust being built or broken in 30 seconds. And so imagine that you're sitting in a room, 10 to 15 leaders, and you are the senior leader. And someone that reports to you offers candid, critical feedback in front of their peers and to folks that work for them. And you did not expect that to happen at all. That was not on the agenda. That wasn't on the pre-meeting. All eyes are on you as the leader. And what do you do next to build trust, to build courage in that meeting and for your team?
You want me to start? Or are you looking at me? Or I'll start.
Go ahead. You can
All right, so I'll start. So I am not a leader. So this is advice given to you entirely from me studying leaders. And what we know is that when someone is threatened, the first thing that happens is their brain goes into a threat response. And so you kind of see that sort of like, big red dot in the center of the brain. And what we want to do is we want to instead shift the brain into an openness or wonder response, which is a big blue light on the top of your brain. And we know from looking at successful leaders that the fastest way to do that in a room is to acknowledge a hard fact. So if you go into the room and say, this is something that is a fact about me, not necessarily opinion about me, not like I'm a loser, you know what I mean? Or I suck at things, but I was asked to do this and I accomplished less than I wanted to, a specific thing, that immediately shifts the brains of your audience from an aggression mode into a love or wonder mode. And so the number one piece of advice I would give to any leader before going into any meeting, so this is hard to do in the room unless you've practiced doing it. The number one piece of advice I give to any leader before they go in a room is say, what is the fact that I'm most afraid of voicing when I enter this room? And I'm going to make a commitment to myself to acknowledge that fact if it comes up. You don't need to push it. You don't need to do TMI. You don't need to run the room and be like, let me tell you this thing about myself. But the moment that it comes up, you acknowledge it. And even if that fact does not come up in the room, by making that commitment before you step into the room, you shift your brain from a threat response into a wonder response. So that would be my advice. You'll probably get better advice from the two gentlemen to my side. For those of you who don't know, this is like a very stressful experience for me because this is like being on the NBA All-Star team right now. I don't know if this was appropriately communicated to you, how like everyone on stage is like secretly intimidated by everybody else on stage because it's like the nerd squad up here. So hopefully I got like the ball moving a little bit and I will pass it over to
Paul O'Brien.
Paul O'Brien, you want to take this one?
All right, I'll run with it. Whenever I think of trust, I think of the word confidence. So the word confidence means with intense trust. And I often defer to others for interpersonal dynamics. I find it challenging enough for me to figure out how to win the ultimate game and the battle within my own mind. So I'll defer to these two and you, Suraj, for the interaction between the individuals. But when I show up in a meeting, I'm actually thinking about who I am as I'm showing up in that meeting, and I want to create an environment through which each of the individuals are showing up as their best. And I'll tell you what, for me, I'm much more likely to practice my philosophy and embody wisdom, discipline, love, and courage when I do the most basic fundamentals. Did I eat well? Did I move? Did I sleep? Today started last night. So I really step back and look at what can we do to create the culture within ourselves to allow ourselves to show up in the midst of that inevitable conflict with as much trust in ourselves as we can muster. And you only earn that by understanding who you are at your best and doing those things consistently. And again, for me, there's a quick test of, am I at my best? Because that situation is going to knock me off center faster if I'm not. And then quickly, Marcus Aurelius would say, look, you will be knocked off center. Don't be surprised by that. That's rule number one. It's going to be challenging today. It's going to be challenging tomorrow. Don't be surprised by that. Nothing's wrong with you. And then he said, make it a game. See how fast, when force of circumstance knocks you off your center, see how fast you can regain your equanimity. So we train elite performers to flip the switch. Maintain physiological control, get your posture right, take a nice, deep, quiet breath, and focus on your values as you strive to show up in that next step. Easier said than done, but that's my quick take.
Paul?
Yeah, so I'll reinforce what they said. So my lab was the first to show that this neurochemical oxytocin is released when someone shows they trust you. And so if this is a difficult conversation, you want to induce that oxytocin release in those people around you because they do exactly what Brian and Angus said, which is oxytocin reduces physiologic stress. Now I feel comfortable. I'm embedded in community. You want to listen to this difficult conversation because it's valuable to me. Oxytocin does that by increasing our empathy, our ability to understand the emotions of others, which is a key leadership skill. So I want to actually say, oh, this is difficult. Thank you, Bob, for bringing that. Thank you, Susan, for bringing that to our attention. That's really important for all of us as a community that's come together and think about how we act on this. And certainly what Brian and Angus said, I've got to come in prepared, I've got to be ready for that, I've got to get knocked back. And I want to have a chance to open up that environment so that we can be as effective as a team, because none of us, for Michelle, flourish alone. We only flourish in groups.
And there's a shared sense of, in what all three of you said around vulnerability and being human and saying, okay, I'm going to walk in, as Angus said, like, this could come up. I'm not going to bring it up, but if it does come up, I have to be prepared. And then, Brian, you're talking about, Marcus really saying you're going to get knocked off center, right? And you have to then prepare. And then to your point that it takes community to flourish, what builds community is some sense of vulnerability, right? And wanting to break down those barriers.
And trust.
And trust. Okay, let's now turn it to a situation that you have experienced. I'm going to ask for one individual to raise their hand, and if not, I am a former camp counselor, and I will call on you. Eugene has given me that freedom to do that, but you are going to just give a quick synopsis of a scenario in the corporate or civic space that you have been in, hopefully recently, where trust was at stake. And then I'm going to ask the gentleman to do the same three things about how you could have responded. Please, Valerie.
Hi, my name is Valerie. Thank you. I'll sit since I'm large. Okay. Quickly, I was CHRO at a publicly traded software company. We just went through a very acquisitive year where we completed 3 outbound acquisitions. And then we undertook an inbound acquisition. We were acquired by a PE firm and privatized. And we had employees in 29 countries around the globe. And everyone was questioning, what happens next? What happens next to my stock? What happens next to my comp? What happens next to my family? What happens next to our mission? What happens next to our ethos? And a lot of those questions we had to answer as we built the plane in the sky, because we had to build a new company. And so the hardest thing was coming to people living in a consistent time of constant change, which itself is destabilizing. Saying, this is going to change. There are other things that are going to change that we don't even know yet. And we don't yet know how we're going to build it. Here's all that we do know, and here's what we want to do. And it was scary for leaders to say, I don't know, we don't know, it doesn't exist yet. But it was just as scary for people to hear it. We chose to be honest about what we knew and didn't know, because that honesty is what really bound us all together in a moment of extreme change and transformation. And it gave people an inkling that, you know what, I don't know the future, they don't know the future, but they trusted us enough to say, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. All right, I'm gonna listen into the next conversation. And we bought trust in the next conversation and kept building. It was hard, but it was worth it. In hindsight, people have said, thank you for being transparent about what you did know and didn't know, because if you'd made it up, we would have known. We would have known, and we would not have trusted you after all this change. And we learned that we need to build trust in every instant. It can be lost in an instant, but we have to build it over time. And the transparency and the vulnerability at every level is a constant investment. And it makes all the difference across culture, across age, across gender, tenure. It was huge in this company. And thank you for what you're saying, because it is scary to do this. What was your question?
You kind of answered their question for me. As I'm sitting there, I'm like, keep on going. You got it. Let's go.
Right.
But I want the three to respond, right? Because the question was where trust was at stake, right? And where courage was needed. Now, it's still there.
Right.
Now, I'm sure that this is a scenario that we're all facing, right? Acquisition, we're going to be acquired. These transactions are happening every day. So I'm going to start with you, Brian. I was looking at Paul, but I'm going to start with you.
I'm going to say, I'd like to take that one first because I'm dead on this one. This is where the neuroscience is actually valuable. Sorry, Brian.
Please.
Which is one of the factors that inhibits our ability to trust others, the release of oxytocin, is high levels of stress. And uncertainty is processed in the brain just like stress. I don't know what's happening, and now I'm shutting down. I'm into me mode. I'm into survival mode. I'm not into generative mode. I'm not into helping mode. I lose community. I'm about me getting through the next 10 minutes because I got a mortgage to pay. I got kids to put through school. And so that radical transparency, because everyone has these nice rectangles in our pockets and purses, and every information gets to be broadcast, everywhere eventually. So what we found is that companies that practice this kind of radical transparency sustain this high level of trust because we're reducing that uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future. Even if we don't know what happens for sure, here's what we think is going to happen. We'll let you know in a week. This is what's happening, that real clarity. So I think what you guys did was fabulous. I'm sorry for stepping on you, Brian, but that was just perfect for me.
I came here to, I was so excited to learn from you, and all the work that you're doing is so inspiring. Beautiful, and I'm just so inspired by you and your presence and how you shared that story and imagining you navigating that. What I think of, partially because I have tattooed to my body, is the idea of antifragility. So when we get hit by life, what do? We can be fragile, we can be resilient, which most people think is the best you can be, but there's something that's the opposite of being fragile, which is anti-fragile. So when life is most challenging, what do? And one of my passions is helping the individual create the certainty in their lives by helping the human being flourish, to be their best self in the face of those challenges. And you did it implicitly. I can feel your leadership and your care for your team and the love that you brought to those moments, demonstrated through the courageous transparency, et cetera. But in those moments, how do we help them create more control? How do we help them get more clarity on who they are at their best, is how I frame it up. And then in those moments when we're most challenged, can we show up as our best and do those little things at the highest level? And I get into the basics of physiology that drives so much of our underlying psychology, the fundamentals of eating, moving, sleeping. I don't think we talk about this stuff enough. But if we're committed to flourishing as organizations, we have to be committed to helping the individuals within our organization flourish. And there's a very, very straightforward science that's revealing all of these exciting truths. And again, just inspired by you and the enthusiasm with which you just expressed that. And your presence right here is just fantastic, so thank you.
Let me acknowledge the value of your response and then also identify the limit of it. No, totally. No, so because, of course, everybody wants a leader in a moment of change to be like, I don't know what's going to happen next. Everybody wants the leader to say that. But then they don't want the leader to keep saying that. They don't want the leader to, I don't know. And the reason for that is ultimately trust in an organization comes from having a shared story. And that's what produces the cohesion. So as a leader, you've both got to acknowledge in the moment, I don't know what the future story is, but then I've got to shift to figuring out what that story is. And so how do you do that when you can't see the future? Well, the first step should be, particularly after an acquisition, is to go to all the folks that you've acquired and ask them, what was your story? Let me identify, not the whole story, but let me identify a moment when you came through change or volatility. What's a moment in your organization where you handled an unknown future? And then I'm going to listen very carefully to that, and then I'm not going to make some generic response. I'm not going to say, well, that proves the value of agility, you know? I'm instead going to say, what was really special about what you did in that instance was this thing which I would not have thought to do. And then, first of all, what you're doing is you're building your organization's confidence that they can lead themselves through uncertainty. And second of all, what you're also doing is you're learning about the parts of their story that are going to become your future story, and that you're going to tell back to them at the same time as you're telling your half-formed story of the future. So I think it's really important as a leader to be vulnerable and honest. I mean, honesty is the basis of trust. I think all of us would basically agree with that on some level, you know. But it's also important to realize as a leader, you've got to get moving. And you've got to act. You've got to act in uncertainty. And so my advice in this situation would be to act by first going backwards. We know that people who are successful at going forwards in uncertainty, the first thing they do is remember backwards to a time when they handled it before. So take that moment, go backwards with your team, go forwards.
All right. Are there any more scenarios out there? Or we can do our mini group work. But I want to give a chance if there are any other leaders out there that want to grab the microphone and want to share something that they want to reflect on. I am seeing none, hearing none. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple minutes. You're just going to be with the folks that are next to you, groups 3 to 4, and you're going to talk about when trust or courage was at stake and what you learned and what happened. Then I'm just going to ask a couple of the groups to share the quick highlights, the headline of that, and then I'll ask these 3 gentlemen to react to that as well. All right, so y'all have 2.5 minutes. Go. So I'm going to, what I would love to do is one story from this side of the room, one side from the middle, and then one from this side of the room. Let's go ahead and start here on my left-hand side. Is there any group that would just like to quickly share the story, what they learned, and then I'll have whoever would like to jump in, and Dean.
A few years back when there was an election and Patagonia wasn't quite sure to do because they knew that the new incoming president would be very anti-climate. It wasn't about politics, it was about climate. So Black Friday was coming up, which is the biggest day of the year for Patagonia, or all retailers. That's the day you make money. It's why it's called Black Friday. So we weren't sure what to do. Should we close the stores? Should we protest, or what do we do? And a junior marketing person said, I don't know if you know this, Patagonia gives 1% of top-line revenue to the planet every year. The junior person said, what about 100% on Black Friday? And the head of marketing said, yes. And text the CEO. And the CEO said yes. Mm-hmm. And the CEO texted the founder. The founder said yes. So we thought we were going to give away $5-6 million that day, the biggest day of the year, our most profitable of the year. We're about to tell employees we're about to give all of our profit away, and some of you may not get bonus because we are not going to make it this year. We gave away $13 million, and it was the most profitable year in Patagonia's history, and 2 more years of profitability. So that was like a lot of trust and courage from not just the founder or the CEO, but from all employees. We had to trust and have a lot of courage because everything was online for that moment, but we thought this is the right thing to do. So
thank you. Gentlemen?
Suraj, if I can comment on that. My company is called Heroic, and I've asked everybody, do you know what the word hero actually means? No one has ever known. Does anyone here know what the word hero actually means? It doesn't mean, what was that? Do we have an answer? Yeah, there you go. I like that. Well, I'll tell you what, though. You also cannot be a hero without what you all embody, which is love. So in ancient Greece, the word hero meant protector. Not tough guy, killer of bad guys, protector. And a hero's secret weapon is love. And what's interesting is the word courage comes from the ancient word for heart. So just as courage vitalizes all your other virtues, it's love that vitalizes all the other virtues, and it's you. To me, that was so much more than trust and courage. It was love. That was an absolute act of love. And I just needed to step in real quick and just highlight that ultimately, I think, is what makes the world tick. It's what makes organizations tick. It's us at our best. We're living for something bigger than ourselves. We're purpose-driven in the deepest sense of living for something beyond our own well-being. And as a byproduct, obviously, we feel the joy that these guys can tell us all about in more detail. But what a beautiful story.
Yeah, I mean, that was beautiful. And I will just say, to piggyback on that, when times change, you got to do something new. And new ideas always come from new voices. And so your job as a leader at some point is to say yes to something that makes you uncomfortable and that you would not have thought of doing yourself.
Anything to add?
No.
All right. One more. Let's get 1 or 2 more from the audience. Anyone here from the middle section? Man, lunch was that good. Thank you. We'll get the mic to you. Thank you.
So I was an executive at a major CPG firm, and they had hired me because they wanted to build capabilities around AI, advanced analytics, data, and they were falling like exponentially behind. And they had a few false starts. So they're like, okay, we're going to bring in a change agent. Through referrals, got hired. And I started day 1. And I was like, day 2, day 3, your first 6 months, you're still knowing the lay of the land, you're having your one-on-ones. But your intuition is feeding you along the way of like, okay, this is a group of decision-making through consensus and not consideration. Everyone's afraid of taking one step forward. Everyone has to be in the room, but it takes weeks just to get calendars aligned. And by the time we make a decision, 6 months have gone by, and by then the entire design, architecture, tech stack has totally changed. But you learn tolerance, is yesterday's word, and acceptance at the same time. But the challenge is because they brought me in, the CIO of this very large firm, we were in contention. He was pissed off that I was hired to begin with because he viewed it and took it personally as if it was a slap in his face. He's not doing enough in these spaces. And so they hired another technical person, and he kept calling me shadow IT in front of the executives, and he would tell his teammates to not invite my teammates. Then my team's morale was shrinking, and they're like, why are we here? What's our purpose? And at the time, the family that owned the company was the one that hired me. And I had a conversation with them about a year in. I said, listen, you hired me to do a job. Unfortunately, I'm not being enabled or empowered to do the job. But what's worse is my team is not being empowered or enabled, and we can't even take one step forward, and that's a reflection, and it doesn't feel good. So I'm going to have to call my shelf life. Either we're allowed and enabled to build the things that you fundamentally need and this organization needs, or you don't need me. I'm getting paid a lot of money to just sit here and nod my head and go on one alignment call after another alignment call after another alignment call. And so it was one of those things where I had to talk to my leadership team, and there was about 7 of them. I said, I'm going to go have a talk with the family. This is what I'm going to say. What do you guys think about it? And then ultimately I did, and I did resign without a single backup. Now, I share this story because sometimes you have to call your shelf life in a situation where you can't bring the value that inherently you need to know. I viewed it at the time as rejection, not knowing it was a form of leadership. My team went through ups and downs as well, but everyone eventually recovered. And they said that that one moment, for them at least, was sometimes you have to make those big, bold moves and be accountable for what you believe in. And it's not just about the job. It's about seeing what's needed. It's about leading with love and care. It's about not taking the company for granted, even sometimes if it's at your own cost. And so I ate egg, if you will, and left. And interestingly enough, 4 months later, they let him go, and they asked me if I wanted his position. I didn't get to share that part. And I said it wouldn't be the right move because for other reasons. But there was definitely an awareness, and I don't think any executive had ever left because the tenureship's really long there because they pay lovely pensions and paychecks, and everyone's pretty much there very comfortable. So it kind of shook things up a little bit.
Thank you for sharing.
If I can jump in real quick, one of the key indicators of trust is autonomy. But if I trust you, if you're trained, I'm going to let you do your thing, right? So that shows that I want you to be successful. I want the organization to be successful. And so by not giving your team autonomy, I mean, you already know this, it just says, we don't trust you. We don't think you belong here. We don't want you here. And so from a leadership perspective, it's hard sometimes to let go. We sort of want to manage people. Yeah. But I think it's really, once you've trained people extensively, then you should delegate generously.
Yeah, I second everything. I also think that we forget that courage actually starts in humility. And the ultimate indicator of humility is sacrifice. I will sacrifice myself for my team. And it sounds like you were surrounded by a whole bunch of folks in your organization who are focused on themselves and their own ego, which is oftentimes confused as being the source of courage. And the fact that you were willing to step forward and put the organization ahead of yourself to the extent that you would actually leave the organization with no future for yourself. Just think about how much better our world would be if people, instead of staying in these situations where they knew that they were doing the wrong thing, risking moral injury, they left those situations and they showed other people, to Paul's point, you have the autonomy to leave too.
Brian?
I'll leave it at that. Beautiful.
Great. Well, I want to be thoughtful of time and the rest of the agenda. We could go all night on this conversation, and I hope it prompts everyone to think about what breakout sessions they're going to next, but also the conversations that we're having about how we live courage in real life, how we live it in creating safety for flourishing, how we use love as the foundation of it, and how we prepare and tell the stories that allow for that conversation and those tough conversations and for courage to come alive. So Angus, Brian, Paul, thank you very much. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.